Hilchas Mechirah Perek Shmein Oser. Oser l'ramis is bnei Adam v'mekach umemker. You're not allowed to deceive people in mekach umemker, a lignev is daitav, or to have them think something which is not really true. Ramis is bnei Adam means when you're actually cheating him. He thinks he's getting one item and he's getting a different type of item, so he's mamish losing out. Lignev is daitam is even when he's not really losing out. He's if a person's selling, in the case that the Rambam says in Hilchas Deis, you're selling someone something which a goy he thinks that it's a psar shchuta, and lepel is nevela. So B'amas he's not losing out. There's no difference for a goy if it's shachot or nevela. But lepel it goes into together of goyin of his daitam. That would be also included in goyin of his daitam. Also, the Ramis is b'yadam b'mekach umemker. You're not allowed to deceive people mekach umemker to actually fool them. Oy lignev is daitam. Ve'echad goyim ve'echad Yisrael shavim b'davar zeh. This applies both to Yisrael and goyim. Now, hoye yedei sheyesh b'makarim mum. If a person knows that there's some blemish in something he's selling, yediyei lilekech. You should notify the lekech. Now, the question is: this going to together l'ramis b'nei adam nekach umemker, or this goes into lignev is daitam, or maybe both? The Alter Rebbe brings this legabi also legabi the din of lignev is daitam. That's in the case of lignev is daitam. Hoy yedeh sheyesh b'makarim mum yediyei lilekech. Then the Rambam continues, "Va'afilu lignev das ad brias b'dvarim osir." And partially lignev das ad brias b'dvarim would be like, it's bechlal and negeh to the Mekach. A person comes into your store. That's the case the Rambam says in Hilchas Deis. A person comes into your store, and really you have to open a barrel to sell him wine. And you tell him, "Oh, for you, I'll open a barrel of wine." So be'emes, you have to open the barrel of wine anyways, and that person's not losing out anything. It's just you're making it sound as if for this person you're giving him an extra covered, which is not really true. So that goes into together of also ligniv das abrias b'dvarim, and you're not allowed to deceive someone, even if that person has no loss as a result of this deception. Halacha beis. Ein mefarkas in a sa'adam. You're not allowed to, so to speak, make a person look nicer, put like certain colorings on the person to make the person look nicer than he really is. We're talking about you're selling an eved, and you want this eved to be sold for a higher price, so you put a certain type of maybe makeup or a certain coloring on the person's body in order for him to look nicer. And also v'leis hakelim hayishanim, old kelim, kedei shiyiru kechadoshim. You want old kelim, in other words, it was old vessels, and you want them to look nice, so you go ahead and you shine them, you shellac them, in order that they should look as if they're new. Not nice. Nice is beseder, but you're deceiving it that as if it's new. Aval mefarkas and chadoshim. But if you have new kelim and you want them to look really nice, it's not like old kelim you're making pretending that they're new. They're new kelim, but you want them to be nice with a shine. Kigen sheyoshuv, that you should rub it, v'yigaitz, and you should iron it, v'yiyapik kol tzrochav, and do whatever it is to beautify it. So if we're dealing with a new piece of clothes, but you're selling a new piece of clothes, and you want it to be ironed, so the person should see that it's nice and clean, so that's beseder. Mashenkin, if you take something old and you present it as if it's new, so that would be deceptive. Halacha Gimel, ein mesharbetin sa'odam b'mayim shel chizr. Mayim shel chizr means water that was soaked in bran. Now, mesharbetin literally means make his hair stand up. When a person drinks the water of bran, so that causes him to be bloated, to look bigger, to swell, and that causes vice that the hair that's on his body should like stand up, and therefore the person looks healthier. So you're not allowed to do that because you're selling a slave, and you really want the slave to look healthier than he really is. So you're giving him bran to drink before the sale. In order for him to bloat and to swell, and his face should look fatter, and meled he'll be more expensive. And also, you're not allowed to dye his face with a certain dye, and when you're selling the intestines of an animal, you're not allowed to blow it up, that it should look bigger. You blow them up, after you took the intestines out of the animal, so now you go ahead and blow them up so they look bigger. And also, you're not allowed to go and soak meat in water, and the reason is because when you soak meat in water, it becomes white, and it looks more fatty, and fatty meat was considered more expensive. So all these things are you're taking something which is not really what it is, and you're pretending it should be something other than it is. Like, for example, you're giving this water, this water that was the bran was soaking in it, and that's causing that this person should look bloated. He's not really so big, but he looks bloated right now because he just drank this type of water. Or his face is not really so red, but you put a coloring on his face, and that's why he looks healthier. And the same thing, these intestines aren't as big, but because you blew it up, they look bigger. Now, they're not so fatty, but because they soaked in water, that's why they look fatty. And then there's another thing we mentioned before, whereas you're not allowed to sell a goy meat that's really a nevela as if it's a shchuta. A goy comes into a kosher butcher shop. So the kosher butcher shop sells prices for kosher. A kosher butcher shop is more expensive than a non-kosher butcher shop. Now, lepel, it happens to be that this butcher shop, that is a kosher butcher shop, happens to have some meat which is non-kosher, which really has to give away to the non-kosher butcher shop. So for goyim, and here this person's walking in, he's trying to buy kosher meat, and lepel, you're selling him non-kosher meat, because as far as he's concerned, there's really no difference if he's going to eat kosher meat or non-kosher meat, but you're not allowed to because you're fooling him. There's really no difference, but if he is under the impression he's buying shchuta, you're not allowed to sell him something that's nevela. Halacha dalet. Mutter lover is a grisim. If you have grisim is legumes, and you want to, and usually they have like pebbles in there, and you want to take out those pebbles from the grisim, that's fine. Avalei al pia megura. If you have, let's say, a whole barrel or a whole a whole pile of this grisin, and now you're going to take out the pebbles which are on top of the pile. So when a person is going to buy this pile, he's going to be under the impression that the entire pile doesn't have pebbles. So you're not allowed to do that. You're allowed to take out the pebbles, and fine, you're selling these legumes without pebbles. Masha'inkin, to have the pebbles taken out on top of the pile, and that person will be under the impression that the entire pile is without pebbles, that you're not allowed to. You're fooling him, and he'll think that the whole thing is without any pebbles. That's din number one. Then another din, umuter lechenveni lechal lekloyes ve'gezen letinoikes ulishvaches kedei lahargiv lovi. You have a storekeeper, and he's giving out nuts, he's giving out all different types of delicacies. Kloyes is like roasted kernels of wheat. So you give it to the children or to the shvachas. Like this, they'll come. You go into a bakery, they'll give you a free cookie. So you'll want to come to this bakery. So the chavani, the storekeeper, is allowed to do this, to give out kloyes v'gezim l'tinokis. Because everyone would do it. They're not fooling anyone. They're doing exactly what they're doing, and what they're doing, anyone could do. And also a peiches mishar shebeshuk. If there's a certain price, and he wants to undercut the price, that's also fine. Kedei laharbis makifim mimenu, that people should come and want to buy from him. Nobody could stop him from selling it below the regular price. He's not fooling anyone. He's doing exactly what he's doing. He's saying that he's rather go ahead and sell more at a lower profit margin rather than sell less, like everyone else is selling. Halacha hey. Ein ma'arvin peiros bepeiros. A person buys produce from one supplier or from one field, and now he has produce from another field. So he shouldn't mix the peiros from one field to another field. Va'afilu chadoshim b'chadoshim, even if we're talking about new produce, fresh produce to other fresh produce. Ve'ein tzorich leimer yishanim b'chadoshim. Certainly you shouldn't mix old produce with new produce. Va'afilu ha'yishanim b'yeker va'chadoshim b'zoil. Even if, let's say, the old produce is more expensive, and the reason is for example, grain. So when you want to grind them, so it's easier to grind grain that's older, because it's older, it's already drier, so it's easier to grind. So mele, by putting old produce into the new produce, l'chura, the old produce is more expensive, but nevertheless, it's possible that the person that's buying the item would rather have only new produce. And as he's buying new produce, there's mixed in a little bit old produce. So the question, the old produce is even more expensive. You say, yeah, it's more expensive. But it could be there are certain people that want to buy dafka new produce because they want to have it a longer shelf life. In other words, it's old produce, it's stuck right now more expensive, but it won't last that long. Mashenk, if it's new produce, I'm not interested in using it right now. I might use it in a while, and I'm going to wait for it to dry out. But if I'm going to buy it together with an old produce, by the time I want to use the new produce and it's going to ready to be old, the old will be gar old. and Memele it won't be usable anymore. It won't be that good. So therefore, afila yishana b'yekar v'chadashim b'zel mipnei shalikech reitzel yashnom, because the buyer wants to make it old. That's it. That's din nachamon. Now biyayin hushu tiru la'arif kosher birach bein agitis. As far as wine is concerned, you want to mix two types of wines with each other, and one wine is a stronger wine, and the other wine is a weaker wine. So in the time bein hagitis, and it was the time of the pressing of the grapes, at that point in time, you could go ahead and take stronger wine and mix it with weaker wine. At that time, because lepel, it ends up being better. In other words, it's not a chsarn. There's no chsarn of mixing the stronger wine with the weaker wine. Fakert, that'll make it enhance it. The stronger wine will cause that the weaker wine should become stronger, and it'll be better. However, v'imhoya time, that's the number one. Masha'enkin, not b'shas hagites. Not b'shas hagitis, you're not allowed to. So no, it's nachamo. By yain, let's go back again. Peiris b'peiris, normally you're not allowed to mix. You're not allowed to mix peiris b'peiris, even yishonis b'chadoshes, even if yishonis are more expensive. That's the number one. Yain b'yain, you're allowed to, kosher b'rach, you're allowed to, bein hagitis. And the reason is, mipnei shemash biche. Now there's another din. V'imhoya taimei niker, if l'moshel, you mix wine and wine, and the person that's going to come and buy the wine will taste the wine, so he'll clearly see what's going on here. So that is mutar la'arav b'chol makim. So in other words, as far as peiris b'peiris is concerned, that wouldn't help, because lepel peiris b'peiris b'pastus is talking about yavish b'yavish. So the fact that he's going to taste it, he's not going to know what the time. Masha'enkin, when we're talking about lach b'lach, so lepel, since everything got mixed up, so memela, so it's snickered the tam. So memela margish alekech lefichach mutar la'arav. So therefore, you can mix it. That's so memela b'kitzur nachamo. So wine with wine, you're allowed to be ma'arev only bein agitis, because rach bekosher. That's when it's not really nicker tam. When a person tastes it, he's not nicker. Masha'enkin, if you mix it in such an extent where the tam is nicker, so then there's no problem, because because the person knows he'll taste it and he'll see if he's happy with the result of this mixture. Halacha vov, ein ma'arvin mayim b'yayin. You're not supposed to mix water into wine. You don't mix water into wine. Before you drink it, there would be music. There would be moizik, the yain, right before you drink it. But we're talking about not before you drink it. Right? You have wine, and now you mix water in it. So you're not supposed to mix water into wine. If someone that water got mixed into his wine, he shouldn't sell it unless he notifies the buyer that he should know that this wine, water was mixed into. And also, he shouldn't sell it to a wholesaler, to someone or to a storekeeper. Why? Because there's always a concern that this person you're selling it to, if you're selling it to someone that's going to use it himself and you notify him it's matzah, there's no problem. But if you sell it to someone that's going to go resell it, so it is a concern that he'll resell it and he won't notify what the matzah is. Now, in a place where they put water into the wine, so then is yatel v'hushiyah bein hagitis. In other words, there is a musig of putting water into wine before it fermented already. In other words, bein hagitis, in other words, when it was just pressed, so then you put the water in the wine, and then it ferments together with the water, so that's beseder. So normally the rule is you don't put water into wine, period. You don't put water into wine. However, there are places where they mix water into wine, bein hagitis. In those places, you're allowed to do it. Halacha zayin, hatagar, noitel michomish gites, v'noitem l'teich pitem echad. Someone that's a wholesaler, and there's a person that sells it, he's a businessman. So we know that the wine that he sells is not wine that he himself pressed, but rather he bought wine, and now he's selling the wine. So he could buy from 5 different presses, and he mixes all together into one big barrel, and that's besed, because everyone expects him to do that. That's not, no one when he walks into him is expecting that he should be getting from one place. Or michan mishgranis from 5 different places, 5 silos, 5 different places where people were threshing their tvua, and and he could put it into one pile. And those, the point is that he could gather from different places, from different suppliers, and mix them together. In other words, that's only, he's buying from different suppliers and he's putting them together. But if he knows that one supplier is a good supplier and he's buying from that good supplier, and then he's mixing in also some stuff from a bad supplier, and he wants people to think that he basically has from the good supplier, and he's just mixing in from the supplier that's supplying items that are not so good, so that is not allowed to. He's not allowed to be mischaven le'arev. But on the other hand, he buys from different places, and he all mix it. He doesn't have to keep them separately. He could mix them together. Halacha ches. Osir le'arev shmorim, bein biyayin, bein b'shemen, v'afilu kosher. You're not allowed to take dregs. In other words, you have wine, and from that wine came out dregs. And lepeil, you have these dregs. Now you're putting it into the wine. You have wine, and you're putting some dregs into the wine. So lepeil, the wine is going to be a greater volume, but it's not going to be a greater volume of wine. It's going to be a greater volume of dregs. That you're not allowed to do. Now, vafilu shmorim shel emesh. So that's the number one. You're not allowed to put shmorim into wine. Now, vafilu shmorim shel emesh, b'shmorim shel ayim osir. So a person, you made wine yesterday, and you made wine today, and each one of those wines had shmorim. So lepeil, l'mashal, we're going to soon learn that you're allowed to put the shmorim of that wine. L'mashal, you have wine, and then lepeil, that wine ended up having shmorim. So you could pour the rest of the shmorim. Let's you're pouring, let's say, from one keli into another keli. You have a keli of wine, and now you're pouring from that keli into another keli, and lepeil, from the first keli that you're pouring out, there's dregs left on the bottom of the keli. So you could go ahead and mix those dregs with the wine that you just poured out of it. That's what the Ram is about to say. If you pour from one keli to another keli, and there's some dregs left in the first keli, you can take those dregs and put it into the second keli. But let's say you have two such kelim. You have keli, the first keli that you poured into into another keli, and that was from today. And now you had another keli that you poured into also another keli, and that was from yesterday. And now you have shmarim left over from both kelim. So the din is you shouldn't mix those shmarim, because if you're going to mix those shmarim, it's going to ruin the wine. That's Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch. It's going to ruin the wine. So therefore, you don't mix the shmarim of, even though you could put the shmarim of each day into its wine. In other words, the shmarim could be put into the wine. There's no problem of putting the shmarim of this wine into that wine, even though it was left in the original keli, and now you're putting it into the second keli. But to mix the shmarim with each other, that's usher. Let's read it again. Also, la'arev shmarim, you're not allowed to take dregs and put it ben b'yayin ben b'shemen v'afilu kosher, to put a little bit amount of dregs into the yayin b'shemen. That's usher, because you're misrepresenting it. You have wine, and now you're putting in dregs there, and you're going to sell it as if it's wine. Now, v'afilu shmarim shel emesh b'shmarim shel yaim. That's another din. You're not allowed to mix the dregs of yesterday that came out of the wine of yesterday with the dregs that came out the wine from today, which is even if you're selling both wines. You're selling both wines, and really the dregs of yesterday could go into yesterday's wine, and the dregs of today could go into today's wine. Aval, you can't mix those dregs. If you pour the wine from one keli to another keli, and in the first keli there's dregs left in the first keli, so you could go ahead and take those dregs and put it into the second keli. Halacha tes. Hameichel lechaveri shemen mezukik. Someone made up, he's giving him pure oil, shemen mezukik. Is eini mekabel shmarim, so the lekech is not expected to mekabel shmarim, because lepel, he says shemen mezukik. However, mochel is shemen stam. He just said, I'm selling you oil, and normally oil has vices 1.5% of shmarim, of dregs. Mekabel lugo mechze shmarim lechol me'alug. So he's mekabel that lugo mechze will be shmarim for me'alug. So me'alug, it's also the din that if the seller, for example, only has shemen solul, he made up to sell him shemen stam, and lepeil he has only shemen solul, so he doesn't have to give him 100 look. If he could give him only 98.5%. In other words, he could deduct 1.5% of the shemen he's giving him, because that would have been the dregs. That's deducted. The seller deducts that from the volume of how much he's giving the buyer. And also, umekabel bishar shmorim shemer ochur ho'ela l'mayla pnei hashemen. So in other words, besides the fact that he's deducting the 1.5% of those dregs which are on the bottom, he's also, normally when you sell oil, if you don't make up that it's shemen solul, there's also like a cloudiness of oil. There's the cloudy oil which is on top of the shemen, and that's also called shmorim, and that's also when it settles, it's much less. So you also mikabel on yourself, and when the likea goes ahead and expecting to get this the shemen, so he has to deduct first of all. So you're giving him now very good oil, so you have to deduct first of all this shmorim which would have been in the oil. So you only give him 98.5%, and you're also deducting for that shemen ochur which would have been on top of the oil, which now is not there anymore because right now it's settled. So memela you deduct from that as well. So it's mekabel b'shar shmonim. Bishar shmorim shemen ochra elu l'mayla pnei hashemen yeser ala shmorim hayedurim beisim makom. Now yeser ala shmorim hayedurim means besides the shmorim which settle on the ground, which is normally 1.5%. Sometimes it will be different, but besides that, there's also the lekeach is accepting upon himself that when he spoke about 100 lug, he meant 100 lug, which included the shmorim on the bottom and also the shemen ochra on the top. So now when he's giving him pure oil, so he has to deduct that shemen, which would have been the shemen ochar on top, and therefore give him less. Now, b'medvar mamurim, when is all this talking about? Kshenosmli moiz b'tishrei. The deal was made in Tishrei, and in Tishrei, that was when it was just pressed, shashemen ochur, so the shemen was ochur, and now v'lokach hashemen ben nissen, and now he's taking the shemen in nissen, kemidas Tishrei, and he's using the measuring cup that they usually use in Tishrei, which is larger than the measuring cup that they use in Nisan. So now you tell him, the person, listen, we made up from you 100 lug in Tishrei. So he says, hey, listen, I'm giving it to you now in Nisan. In Nisan, it's 100 lug, which would have been 100 lug of Tishrei, which in the measuring cup of Tishrei, that would have included the Shemen Achor. It would have included, first of all, the shemen ochor. It would have included also the shmarim which are on the bottom. So now I have to deduct what the oil that I'm giving you, which is now perfectly pure oil. I have to deduct the shmarim which are on the bottom. That's the 1.5%, like we said before, and also the shmarim which would have been on top, which would have been whatever it would have been. So Memela has to give less. So he gives him less. He doesn't give him the full cup, the full measuring cup of what he would have given in Tishrei, had it had the shmorim on the bottom, and it had the shemen ochar on top. The deal was muchatchila made in Nisan. In other words, they didn't make a deal in Tishrei, but they made the deal in Nisan, which is iktano, which over there, when you speak about the measuring cup of Nisan, it's a smaller measuring cup. So when you speak about 100 lug, you mean taka 100 lug, you don't mean 100 lug plus of that measuring cup. So then, in a mekabel el shmarim bulvad. So then the lekeach only is makabel that you could take away the shmarim. So knows you'll have to, if you made up l'mashal on Nisan to give him 100 lug, so then you give him 98.5 lug if you have shemen sol mamish. If you don't have shemen sol mamish, you give him 100 lug. Masha'enkin, if you made up in Tishrei to give him 100 lug, so in Tishrei you're going to use the measuring cup of Tishrei. The 100 lug measuring cup of Tishrei is a larger measuring cup than the measuring cup of Nisan. So you have to give less to accommodate for that shemen, which would have become, which was shemen ochur, and it would have settled, and you also accommodate for the shmarim, and mainly you give less. That's in the Nekudas Advarim. So notice, when you make up to sell oil, so it depends if you make up to sell oil in Tishrei, and now you're taking it in Nisan, so you have to take into account that in Tishrei there was shemen ochur, and that wouldn't have been something of and now you're getting shemen sol, so therefore you get less of what you would have gotten in Tishrei. Masha'enkin, if you made up l'chatchila Nisan, so in Nisan l'chatchila you made up for shemen sol, now you're getting shemen sol. When we're saying shemen sol, it doesn't mean shemen sol without the shmarim on bottom, it means without the shemen ochur on top. Halacha Yudalf. Hamoicher chitim l'chaverei, person is selling someone wheat, is mekabel of reva kitnis l'chol so. It's very regular that when you cut wheat, so near the wheat grows certain legumes, and memela, so you could expect that there would be a reva. Reva means a reva hakav. Now a saw has 6 kabim, so a reva hakav would mean a 24th of a saw. So you'll be mekabel that a 24th reva kitnis l'chol saw. Each saw there'll be a reva kitnis. So it's a 24th. The volume is a 24th of it will be kitnis. When you sell wheat, the buyer should expect that a 24th of it should be kitnis. Al derech zeh so'irim, if you sell so'irim, is mekabel olav reva nishevis. The shevis is also a certain type, is straw. It's not legumes, but it's straw which is mixed with the so'irim, with the barley. Again, the same measurement. 24th of it would be Nishevis. Adash Nachamal Se'irim is Mekabel Olav Reva Nishevis L'chol So. Adashim, you're selling him lentils, is Mekabel Olav Reva Afruris L'so. With the lentils you pull out of the ground, so there'll be earth there as well. So a Reva So, which is the 24th of a So, would expect to be earth. Te'enim, you're selling a person figs, is Mekabel Olav Esen Maslias L'chol Meya. You could expect that 10 of those figs, 10 out of 100 figs, will be wormy, will be starting to have worms in it. That's a regular thing with figs. So when you sell figs, you expect that a tenth of it should have worms in it. Mochalish arpetus, if you sell just regular fruit, is again, Mekabel of Reva Tinefis L'chosa. You expect that a 24th of it, a Reva Akav of each saw, should be Tinefis. Tinefis is already spoiled. Nimtze mehem yesr al shirur meilu kolshu. If Lepel, the seller, sold the item, and then you realize the buyer sees that the item has more than a 24th, or more by chitim and by seirim and by lentils and alderas and by sharperes, or it has more than a tenth, b'neget teinim, so then yinape sakel. So then you clean out the whole thing. You take out all the stuff that's not good. And v'yitn le'peres menupin ubrurim shem b'mklo. So in other words, if originally was included in the sale the amount that's reasonable, a 24th, in other words, you have a 24th of kidneys mixed with the chitim, or you have a 24th of nishevis that are mixed with the seirim, so that's beseder, so the sale is a good sale. But if Lepel, there was more than a 24th, so now you have to go ahead and clean out all the stuff that's not good, which doesn't belong there, and now the buyer has to supply him the full measurement that should be perfect. Halacha Yud Beis. All the dinim that we learned until now of these shiurim are only b'makom she'ein lo minik. Aval b'makom she'yesh lo minik. But if they have a specific minik, or is the rule of that place is akel k'minik hamadina. Halacha Yud Gimel. Yesh mikei mishanago she'yo kol peiros menukim ubrurim michol davar. That it always has to be perfectly clean and perfectly pure. And v'she'yo am yenes v'ashmonim tzlulim, and the wine and the oil should be pure, clear, there shouldn't be any dregs. Even half of it is dregs. Or even if the peiros was mixed in, half of it was earth or straw, is yimacher k'meshahu lefichach. Habeir tzroir miter garnish shel chaveri. You have a person has a pile of wheat, and now you go ahead and you just pull out a stone from that pile of wheat. So so you took away the stone from that pile of wheat. Now Lepel, the stone has no value. The stone has no value. But Lepel, since this stone was in the pile of wheat, he could have sold it as a part of the wheat. Right now, he can't put that stone back into the wheat because you're not allowed to put a stone into the wheat. But while the stone was there, he was able to sell this whole pile as a pile of wheat, and it would be sold as wheat, whatever the price of wheat is. So noisily, the mechitim kishir tzreir should be yodav. He has to pay him for this stone that he took out of this pile of wheat, as if he took chitim, like as if he took chitim for himself. Why? Because if this person would have left this stone in that pile of wheat, in this garden, is it would have been sold like according to the price for chitim. Let him put it back. No, also out of culture. Right now you can't put it back. So basically, by the fact that he took this stone out of this garden, so he caused that he shouldn't be able to, he should have less wheat. Halacha Yudal, Amecher kankanim b'sharim b'mokim shei minik. He sells kankanim jugs in sharim in a place where there's no specific minik. Is mekabel l'chol meya asora pitosis. In sharim it was a regular thing that sometimes it didn't come out so dry. When the keli doesn't come out so dry, it's not so strong. So pitosis means kelim which are not so dry. In other words, they're nice and they're made with sulfur, and in other words, they're proper kelim. But on the other end, there's a certain weakness to them. So when a person, it's a regular thing, then when a person sells 100 jugs, you could expect that 10 of them should be pitoses, which means things that are not so strong.